Okay, we'll be starting momentarily. Great. Okay, thank you so much for joining us this evening. On behalf of the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies in Hayama, Japan, I would like to welcome you to our high-level political forum 2021 side event entitled Integrating the SDGs into Business Operations and Supply Chains in Asia and the Pacific. My name is Eric Zussman, and I am a research director here in our Integrated Sustainability Center. And it's a great pleasure to have so many colleagues joining us for this important event. I think as we look toward the discussion that will be featured tonight, one of the key things is that we recognize the business community has an important role to play helping to implement the SDGs. We've seen this in Japan, and we've seen this in many other parts of the Asia-Pacific region. But we also recognize that if business is going to play an important role, they need to move beyond just marketing slogans and corporate responsibility programs. Rather, what we need is for businesses to fully integrate the SDGs into core planning processes, and then increasingly, as we recognize in the COVID era, also to integrate the SDGs into transnational supply chains. So the event today will bring together some experts who have unique insights into what it will take to make sure that businesses are working on the SDGs both at home and abroad. And it will be broken up into a framing presentation, which will be provided momentarily, and then a panel discussion, which will be facilitated by colleagues here from IGES. After the framing presentation and the panel discussion, we would like to invite people that are participating online to also raise questions for the panel participants. And you can type those questions into the Zoom chat box. So without further ado, I would like to begin the session by introducing my colleague, Ms. Nobuo Amanuma. Amanuma-san is Deputy Director here in our Integrated Sustainability Center, and she has been working on sustainability issues as well as the SDGs for basically since the SDGs were first approved by the international community. She's also worked with the Economic and Social Commission for the Asia Pacific in Bangkok, Thailand. She'll be presenting a little bit on some of the work that IGES has done on SDGs and business, and also tying it into some of the panel discussion where we look more and more at the supply chain issue. So without further ado, I'd like to now turn over the virtual lectern to Amanuma-san. Amanuma-san, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Hi, everyone. So I'm Nobuo Amanuma. I'll provide the framing presentation. So we're all aware that SDGs got adopted in 2015, and now we're in 2021. So we're only left with 10 more years of implementation. And so far, the progress has been made, but much more is needed. And so in 2019, the UN world leaders gathered there, and they called for a decade of action to deliver the 2030 agenda and the SDG. And the decade of action asked for transformative solutions through accelerated efforts at all levels and by all stakeholders. And when they say by all stakeholders, it definitely includes business community. And in fact, IGES has been thinking that business community is very important in achieving the SDGs. So since 2016, we started to collaborate with business community in Japan to help Japanese companies to strengthen their SDG efforts. Here I'm listing some of our work, but the book on the right-hand side of your screen, it basically is a compilation of tools, and it explains the steps that companies can take to implement the SDGs. But the report on the left side from 2018 to 2021, these are our annual reports that basically look at how Japanese companies and organizations integrate SDGs into their core business. And it also looks at how aware they are about the SDGs. And we have been doing this, we have been producing this report in collaboration with Global Compact Network Japan. That's a business group. So today I wanted to go a little deeper into what we have found through these annual reports, focusing on the latest one, which basically features COVID-19 responses by companies in implementing the SDGs. And of course, what we have been looking at quite a wide range of business initiatives. So we haven't focused specifically on supply chain issues, but from the findings of these reports, we can definitely get some insight about supply chain issues. So that's what I'm going to talk about. So, but before I start going into the details of our findings, I just wanted to clarify that the survey was targeting Global Compact Network Japan member companies and organizations. And most of them are large companies working internationally. So that basically means that many of them probably have an international supply chain. Anyway, so let's go to the survey result. So over the past years, we have been asking the same questions so that we can collect data over time. And in 2016, when the SDGs were just adopted and started to be implemented, most of the companies were still trying to understand what SDGs were. But right now, in the latest survey, most of the companies have already finished prioritizing which goals to work on, and they already set the targets for themselves, and they have started to integrate the SDGs into their core businesses. And in terms of the awareness, it's incredible that 85% of the top management are already aware of the SDGs. But you also see that limited or low level of awareness among affiliated companies. And that might pose a challenge in terms of supply chain. But nonetheless, if you look at their activities, it's positive to note that it seems that the importance of partnership is well recognized. And if you look at who they work with through partnership, 57.7% responded that they work with suppliers. But this doesn't clarify on what area they work with and which suppliers they work with. And when it comes to what kind of topics related to SDGs they work on, the most commonly tackled challenges include climate change, decent work, sustainable consumption and production. But the goal number 14, 15 on ocean and biodiversity, they're not so often tackled. But I think these issues are actually quite important if you want to really make your supply chain sustainable and environmentally friendly. So this is another list of things that they are working on. And you see that human rights due diligence here, which has a lot to do with supply chain. And I mean, compared to climate change and diversity issues, telecommuting, human rights due diligence is not that worked on. So that this is, something we should note of. And we conducted this survey in the middle of COVID-19. And so we asked them about business continuity planning. And actually, majority of them, of the responding companies, have the business continuity plans, and they actually include supply chain as one of the components. But again, what they mean by fulfilling responsibility in supply chain is needs more clarification, more in-depth study. So again, here also, they're trying to tackle supply chain issues, and this is what they realized due to COVID. But then addressing human rights, labor issues arising at suppliers is limited at 12%. So this also means that perhaps human rights issues is not not very worked on. So in conclusion, I just wanted to highlight that there has been a great progress on integrating the SDGs into core businesses, at least among the companies that we looked at in Japan. And there's also increased awareness that SDG actions basically include a lot of things, but supply chain is one of them, and many of them are increasingly working on it. But in terms of the kind of action they take, who they work with, how many how many suppliers they work with, the scope of initiatives might be limited, and that's something we can sort of infer from this findings. But at the same time, COVID-19 pandemic really revealed the fragile nature of the current supply chain, and it presented a great opportunity to look at the supply chain and improve the supply chain from the environmental and social perspectives, not just from the economic perspectives. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Amanuma-san, for that very enriching and illuminating presentation. I think it's quite remarkable that you and other colleagues have worked on these issues for an extended period of time and been able to trace over that time how businesses are now moving from just awareness to integration of the SDGs, and how what used to be just a small subsection of the business community, or at least the Global Compact Network Japan community, had some knowledge of SDGs to now we're in a place where there's not only knowledge, but considerable action. I think at the same time, we also recognize, as you made very clear, that with COVID, there's greater knowledge and the need to strengthen our approach to supply chains. And I think that leaves us in a very good place to move over to the panel discussion. And for that panel discussion, I would like to now turn the virtual lectern over to my colleague, Dr. Simon Olsen. And Simon will be taking care of the moderation of the panel discussion and moving us through the rest of the session. And Simon, the
yes,
floor is yours, so please
yes.
Take it from here.
Thank you very much, Eric, and thank you very much, everyone, for joining from near and far to our little session here, our exchange on how businesses can engage with the SDGs, and in particular, what that means in terms of international supply chains. I have some things to say, but I would prefer to actually give the floor to our panelists and have them share what they are doing. And so the first person I would like to ask to share with us, that is Mr. Julius Kanglet, who is Vice President, the Federation of Free Workers, the International Trade Union Confederation. He's also the focal point for Workers and Trade Union at the Asia Pacific Regional CSO Engagement Mechanism. He's part of the Workers and Trade Union Major Group. He hails from Manila, as far as I am aware, and he is also a great storyteller and musician. Over to you, Julius.
Thank you for the very kind introduction, Simon. Trade unions have long tried to integrate environmental concerns with, of course, social, particularly labor concerns, which is the bread and butter of a lot of trade unions. And over the course of our experience, especially in the context of the SDGs, I think we've really made a lot of stride at different levels. One I could say is particular to the Philippines at the legislative and advocacy level, because we were successful even before the SDGs were born. We were successful in lobbying for and getting enacted the Green Jobs Act in the Philippines. Well, among others, it provides for a lot of incentives for companies who would transform their processes into green processes and using renewable energy instead of dirty energy. So while there's still a lot of things that we can improve around this, but it has given us a lift, because having this Green Jobs Act pushes us to strive even further. So this is at the macro level, but at the workplace level and bipartite level, let me just share very quickly that we were also successful, in partnering with our counterpart employers group in coming up with a new kind of corporate social responsibility. Well, of course, we're familiar with the type of CSR which promotes charity work, but for the kind of CSR that we were able to come up with together, the keywords are principles-based, inclusive, and business sustainable. Of course, we're familiar with the triple bottom line, but one of the major achievements that we've done over the course of the implementation of the project, among others, is coming up with a risk assessment tool. And in simplified form, what we tried to do was to integrate the important environmental and social principles engraved in the following important international guidelines, conventions, and standards. So, sorry for my dog. Among others, this includes, of course, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the ILO's Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work, and then down the line, the UN Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights, and of course, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I would like to talk about that more later, but in the meantime, we could also share that what we've done is that we've also made sure that workers take an active role at the workplace through bipartite committees such as the Workplace-Based Occupational Safety, Health, and Environment Committees, because among others, we think it's very important that workers themselves are involved in all of these processes, so that through these initiatives, we were able to ensure that supplies for companies, especially for food manufacturers, come from sustainable agriculture. Simple stuff like using LED bulbs, recycling, in-house water sanitation, and something close to, and what we learned from the Japanese, so the 5S. So, and this all contributes to social dialogue, a very important tool for workers, because we do want to get involved in the discussions. And among others, I think it's very important to use social dialogue in the process of just transition, because as we transition to greener production processes and upgrade technologies, more often than not, these results to displacement of workers. So it's very important that workers get an alternative as a result of this transition, whether it be training, which, by the way, we have also made some strides with, because in the Philippine context, we have introduced the Green TVET, or the Green Technological Vocational Education System, that integrates green principles. And then, of course, if it comes down to having workers getting themselves displaced because of the process, giving them alternatives, whether getting trained for a new job, upgrading their skills for other kinds of employment. So that's my 4 minutes for now. So I'll get back to other stuff later. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you very much, Julius, for giving us a concise and interesting overview of some of the activities that you are engaged in. And let me just highlight, I think, some things that you also emphasized was the importance of social dialogue in the context of a transition, so that it can be a just transition that doesn't leave people behind. And also, I think green TVET, technical and vocational education and training, I think that's something that maybe some of the practitioners or other participants today might be interested to learn more about. So thank you very much for that. According to my program now, if I can find it, then we would like to ask Mr. Kentaro Edo, who is the Chief Strategy Officer, Special Project of the Executive Office of the Asian Productivity Organization, to present to us what the APO is doing. The APO is headquartered in Tokyo and has extensive experience in how to green the supply chain. So, Mr. Edo, over to you, please.
Thank you for your kind introduction. My name is Kentaro Endo from the APO based in Tokyo. First of all, I'd like to extend my appreciation to IGES to arrange this important event. So could you share the first page of my slide? Firstly, I'd like to introduce the APO. The APO is an intergovernmental organization promoting productivity, fostering innovation, and enhancing competitiveness in its 21 member countries in the Asia-Pacific region through such activities as capacity building efforts and sharing productivity best practices. And as the APO was established in 1961, this year marks the 60th anniversary. Today, I'd like to participate in this panel discussion from viewpoints of the environment and greening. The APO launched the concept of green productivity, GP, in 1994 under the special cash grant of the government of Japan to enhance productivity and simultaneously reduce negative impact on the environment. APO has been disseminating the GP concept and its framework, methodologies, tools, and techniques through capacity building project, establishment of the Center of Excellence on GP, demonstration project, and research. Regarding the focused areas of GP, the GP framework include the three R's of reuse, reduce, and recycle, and design for the environment, eco-design, and green supply chains. These surely contribute to the pursuit of the circular economy. So next slide, please. Let me move on to the next page to introduce examples of recent APO GP activities. First one is about the training course and workshop. For example, this April, we held a workshop on green productivity for the sustainable development. And also, we hold training of trainers and consultants in green productivity. This has been implemented since 2001 to develop GP practitioners and experts. And the next one is about our live via YouTube. Last year, under the spread of COVID-19, the APO initiated a series of live presentations via YouTube, inviting resource persons on productivity, titled Public Productivity Talks. There are several topics related to the green productivity, like as shown in this slide, lean and MFCA for green productivity, or green productivity and circular economy, which have just broadcasted in this May. And also we have other activities like self-learning e-course and research and publication titled Green Productivity for the SDGs, published last December. And these are the activities so far. And regarding the future steps on this GP concept, we adopt the promotion of GP further is in our APO's Vision 2025 titled Inclusive Innovation-Led Productivity Growth, and we have we are aiming to update the concept, tools, and approaches of GP under the ongoing activities called Green Productivity 2.0, supported by Japan. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Endo-san, for sharing with us just a very little bit of the activities of the Asian Productivity Organization with us that includes your work on circular economy, and indeed the trainings and webinars that you are conducting. I think that is an important element that we will touch upon, that namely the sharing of capacity, the capacity gaps and the needed skills that also Julius touched upon, that will be necessary for a just transition, and also on green productivity, of course. So more about that later. Before I move on to our next speaker, let me just thank the participants that have already asked questions. I see that there are actually 4 questions here now. And as Zoom works in a way that participants can type the answer if they wish, and they may also answer live. So to those of you that have already presented, Amanuma-san, Julius, and Endo-san, you can type yourself now if you wish, but you may also wait, and then I will try to pick some of the questions, and we can discuss them later on. So both options are fine, and it's up to you. But I will keep an eye on the questions as they come in. So thank you for that. Let's move on in the program. According to which I would like to ask Christina Martinez to speak next, and she is the Senior Specialist on Environment and Decent Work and Asia Pacific Coordinator for Green Jobs, Just Transition and Climate Action for Jobs Initiative. She is working at the regional ILO office for Asia Pacific in Bangkok and is also a part of the ILO Green Jobs team. She has a vast experience in the region and beyond. Let us hear from her about businesses, jobs, supply chains, and sustainability. Christina, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Simon, and thank you to IGS for inviting the ILO to the partnership for this discussion. Very interesting, the survey that your organization has been conducting, and I appreciate very much the results that were presented here today. When we think in the ILO about how we integrate environment and social SDGs into business planning and supply chains, this is somehow a complex activity that in many ways is not well known by businesses and I would say employers, workers and governments, our tripartite constituency, how that integration can go hand by hand, because we got used to understand much more about the decent work conditions and those conditions that make work a dignity for those that undertake any economic activity. But we are less used to understand how are we going to integrate environment in our daily activities, working activities, business activities. The ILO produced in 2015 the Just Transition Guidelines. This was achieved by workers, employers, governments, discussing together through social dialogue, and they were adopted by the governing body of the ILO. What is exactly the Just Transition Guidelines, or what Just Transition means? This is a process and a goal to undertake climate change actions that advance on equal footing job creation, social justice, and fair transitions for workers, enterprises, and communities. And we heard from Julius from the Philippines how important social dialogue is for workers. But when we refer to equal footing, we refer to a step up from just dialogue is also decision-making. And decision-making in firms, decision-making in business planning, in the activities that the companies will undertake as part of their operation. So it's on this equal footing where the richness of social dialogue relies. And the Just Transition is also a strategy to address the risk of the world of work, the risks associated with environmental challenges and with response measures. And at the same time, it's a way to increase the opportunities that this transition can bring. And it's a pathway to achieve the SDGs that were mentioned before in the presentations. I also would like to mention a very important SDG, SDG 5 on gender equality, also a key action for implementation and integration of the environment and social aspects. If we look at how can we in practice integrate the Just Transition Guidelines into value chains, because we also need examples of how this can be done. And the Just Transition Guidelines can actually help systemic change in industry sectors. I'm putting in this slide just a reference to the decent work in garment supply chains in Asia project that is led by the ILO in partnership with the Swedish Development Agency, SIDA. And this is a project undertaken in Asia. And through this project, we are also implementing the Just Transition for the textile and garment sector in a systemic way and through the toolkit, a toolkit that can be used through social dialogue. And this toolkit needs to be planned, needs to be designed, and with certain level of customization with workers, with employers, and with governments. And that is where the richness of this implementation can be. And for example, you can see there 4 key issues, 4 small reports for planning just transition in the garment sector. One is about how effective the regulations for environmental impact are in your country. Are strong, or they need further strengthening? And we have seen, when we look at this in Bangladesh, in Cambodia, in Indonesia, in Vietnam, the regulations are there. It's not that the regulations are not there. The implementation of the regulations, the policing of these regulations is where the problem might reside. So that means this customization to countries. Another one is about environmental initiatives and the tools in the garment sector in Asia. Are these initiatives all effective? Is the impact all the same? No. The initiatives can be there, can be very well resourced, but the impact might not be there because the systemic transition is not well customized to the particular context. What about the carbon emissions, the footprint? Are these being integrated in the companies, in the business plans? Are carbon emissions in the garment sector being addressed by companies? And we know that in many ways, big factories, big companies have a much better understanding about how to measure these emissions than the small companies in the value chain. That's the micro and small SMEs that are less aware about how the emissions can be measured. And finally, the link between climate change and gender-based violence and harassment in the garment sector. Do you know that the heat in the factories and in many of the small factories can increase the level of violence and harassment for women in the sector? Well, these are the issues that we need to tackle, and you have more information on the garment sector and this toolkit in the ILO website for this project. But certainly the issues of how to integrate needs to be in the detail. The devil is in the detail, and I hope I give you a glimpse of this detail for one of the sectors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina, for a very rich presentation that you shared with all of us. We are very grateful, I believe. And it is indeed really complex. You have shared some tidbits of information that I hope, or we hope, can raise the curiosity of some of our participants to go in and find the necessary more information that they need. I think what you highlighted was really important. Some of the work that the ILO is doing on just transition, the importance of the equal footing principle that can help social decision making, and how to integrate just transition into value chains, that there's already work ongoing there. It's really quite complex, and we believe it's not the last word that is said about those issues, especially in this region. When you mention SMEs, I mean, we know that they provide employment for almost 100% or more than on the high side of 90% in most countries in the region, and how we can ensure that the jobs are fairly paid and decent, and that they can not be left, that they are not left behind in a transition. I think that is also a responsibility of importing countries, myself coming from Denmark, being one of them with big ecological footprints, but where a lot of the products are produced in this region. Also the last has not been said about that. But in the interest of time, let me continue to another important speaker of this session tonight, and that is to Mr. Masaki Wada, who is the director of the Global Alliance for Sustainable Supply Chains. And Masaki-san is director there, and he works to provide research and consulting services on corporate social responsibility, but that also especially tackles human rights and labor issues around migrant workers within the supply chain in various countries. Let us hear from Masaki. Thank you.
Thank you very much for introduction about myself and my organizations. I think I'm sharing that my slides. Hold on 1 second, please. Yep. Okay. Yep. Hi, my name is Masaki again. Actually, I'm belonging to the Global Alliance for Sustainable Supply Chain. I'm based in Japan. My organization established 2017, and our purpose is to build and promote sustainable economy and society that respects human rights and workers' rights of all the people. So that's actually we have the three main activities, which is providing a framework and supports for a corporation's sustainable supply chain management scheme, which is establishing KPIs, PDCA framework, supply chain audit, and others. And for sure that we have been done a human rights due diligence and reporting, which you may know that we have been researching that the Thailand fisheries and poultry industries. And also number three, we providing application for workers monitoring and grievance. This is frameworks. And actually, we have been serving that collective actions also. JP Mirai and Secretariat with JICA, which is a Japan International Cooperation Agency. And we have been serving our member roundtable discussion to improve foreign workers and decent work in Japan. And international initiatives, we are collaborating with Bonscrow, which is for sugarcane, and Better Cotton Initiative and others. As an advocacy, we were establishing that Tokyo Declaration 2020. Tokyo Declaration 2020 on the roundtable acceptance of foreign workers, which is proposing certain requirements to promote decent work for foreign workers in Japan. We have been done this kind of work. Therefore, actually, we are collaborating with JICA to establish that Japan platform migrant workers towards responsible and inclusive society, which is called JP Mirai. The Japan International Cooperation Agency jointly serve as a secretariat, established the JP Mirai on November 16, 2020. This is a platform with membership of about 300 private companies, industry associations, labor union, civil society, media, and researchers. Why we are establishing this kind of a platform, which is background, as of January 2020, there were 1.66 million foreign workers in Japan, including estimated 380,000 technical intern trainees. As foreign workers are an important member of Japanese economy and society, we will be able to move forward to a multicultural society by achieving their decent work. Japan has been criticized for its problems related to forced labor, discrimination, and harassment against foreign resident workers in Japan. This also affects the business and employers. Toward the year of 2030, company and organization that supports and comply with code of conduct will accept foreign workers' responsibility, meeting legal compliance requirements to improve their working and living condition. So this is our purpose, and we are helping that migrant worker in Japan and foreign workers, which can be contribute to Japan society. That is our hope and wishes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Masaki-san, for sharing with us the work that your organization is doing, including promoting, governance mechanisms for companies and due diligence and reporting, and really showing some of the practical work that is done also in Japan to promote social justice for people that may not be able to enjoy it. That's really great. So thank you very much. We have now completed our first round, and my time management is a little bit lacking. But we have 3 questions that have been asked, and I'm just going to give a chance to our participants to see if you would like to. Actually, we have more than 3 questions. If you would like to answer them, for example, there's one here. That is asked by Matthew Hengesborg to the ILO. Christina, do you think you would like to have a go at answering that? That's the one on how can ILO principles on just transition be customized to certain sectors when supply chains are maybe sometimes across several sectors or several countries?
Yes, very interesting question.
I'm sorry to put you on the spot there. I mean, please feel free to navigate.
No, it's an interesting question. I think, you know, when you look at, I go back to the garment sector because I referred to that before. We see the value, the supply chain can go, you know, across the world really, and reaching all the companies that are in the value chain might not be easy, but companies need to understand what is the system where they are. If we only address one part of the system, one part of the, let's say, in the garment sector, many times we said, well, we only look at the factory that produce the garment. So the one that produced this garment next door here, let's say. The sustainability in the sector will not be achieved if you only look at the end process. You need to look also where the raw material is sourced from and how the conditions of work are at the source. Are there decent work conditions? We are still having child labor there? That could be as well. And then at the end of the process, the garment is going to be sold in Denmark. I think you mentioned before Denmark, and that German company in Europe is very, very good at environmental sustainability. But maybe the factory that is next door is not that good, or the factory that is in Bangladesh, the conditions under the heat are creating also violence. So it's this systemic view that gives us the possibility of change. And allow me to finish with this. It's not that change is easy and we are going to succeed in 6 months or 3 months. But we must try. We must try to address the whole system of the industry. And if you look at other industries, let's talk about cement or electronics or, waste, chemical waste, we find many times similar situations. But I think not as much as in the garment industry, because the fashion is such a incredible industry from all around the world. Brings us all the different parts of the value chain. So it's a very good example for this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina, for reflecting upon this question. And indeed, it was not an easy one. So thank you very much for that. I have one more question. I'm not sure who this could be addressed to. I think it could be either addressed to Endo-san or potentially to Amanuma-san. So I will just read the question aloud and see if one of you would like to take a stab at answering the question. This is the one that is asked by Seiichi Sasaki, the first one, basically kindly asking what's the difference between the SDGs and then ESG, and what are common between them, like why we have those two concepts. Would anyone like to take a shot at answering that? That would be kind.
Sure. I was actually typing a response in the chat box, But yeah, thank you for your question. So SDGs are basically 17 goals to be achieved by 2030 for sustainable future. And ESG is often discussed in the context of finance. So ESG investment, ESG finance is one of the tools, one of the ways to help SDGs or help the international community to achieve the SDGs. And both of them, what they have in common is that both of them contribute to problem solving. Problems as in economic, not environmental and social problems of the world. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Amanuma-san. We have a question, one more question before I continue that I would like to ask to Julius, and that's, how can different stakeholders like civil society, employers and governments, how can they actually work together to ensure that workers are not adversely affected by the changing trends, like let's say hopefully positive trends? How can the SDGs be used to guide a social dialogue? Julius, what do you think?
I think among others, we have to begin with having strong social protection institutions, and that's one area where tripartite partners, government, employers, and workers can work on, because with strong social protection institutions, you have a very strong safety nets for workers who might be affected, whether it be the transition to green, the pandemic, or the fourth industrial revolution. So I think that's something we can work on together and discuss it around the table. The other thing, of course, is that there needs to be an industrial plan, especially for developing countries. We have to identify which industries will be winners, which industries will be losers, or in particular, where government should be distributing its meager resources to help specific industries survive. And then encourage the industries to be affected to diversify, maybe go back to the basic products and skills that they are more accustomed to, and then anticipate and forecast employment-rich industries in the near future, in the medium term, so that we can all prepare for this. And the planning itself for all of these things could be done in a tripartite manner through social dialogue.
Thank you very much, Julius, for sharing with us how this can actually be done. And it brings us to the second question that I was supposed to ask, but going into very interesting questions that are being asked by the participants here is also a very interesting thing to do. But basically, the second question is that we have now opened up already is like, what do you see as a key knowledge gaps and needs for businesses if they want to go about creating greener supply chains with better jobs? What are some of these gaps? I would like to ask, well, Julius, you already sort of responded to that. Maybe I can ask Endo-san about his opinion on this question.
Thank you for your questions. And actually, the APO has been promoting the green productivity, focusing on small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs. So I'd like to respond about your question, knowledge gaps and needs. And firstly, SMEs needs much updated information about the current change in procurement in the supply chains, and also the change in the regulatory framework. It's not so easy for each individual SMEs to follow up this one. So the first knowledge gap is rest on this kind of how can they acquire necessary information and changing information. So, and I may touch on about the green productivity, since one of the viewers kindly asked me a question about the green productivity. So I just like to say a bit about the green productivity. The point of the green productivity is to enhance productivity while improving environmental performance. This is a key of the GP. And so this will be done by the application of appropriate productivity and environmental management tools, techniques, and technologies to reduce the environmental to reduce the environmental impact. So the aim of GP is to ensure environmental protection while making business profitable. This is a key point. So I think one of the key knowledge gaps regarding GP SMEs to understand this basic for SMEs. And the secondly, so how can we fill in the gaps for this kind of deepening understanding? So I think it is essential for us to continuously support capacity development, capacity building of the companies, utilizing practical methodology, tools, and techniques down to the earth to be incorporated in company daily operation. For example, Iron and other panelists talked about the tools. I just also published the tools. This kind of practical measures are very useful and important for filling such gaps.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Endo-san. And these are indeed difficult questions. And as our colleague, as Christina has also said, it is not a battle to be won in 3 or 6 months. This is a long-term project to change the trajectory of our system to make it more socially just and more environmentally sustainable. Green productivity, yes, and capacity building, yes, even though it might sometimes mean that we might have to not buy a new shirt every 6 months, but perhaps consume a little bit less. That might also be part of the answer. But let me ask the same question to Christina. What are some of the knowledge gaps and needs for businesses, in your view?
Thank you, Simon. Well, I think there is one area where we can improve and perhaps accelerate. You know, we know that we are here for the long run and we are not going to give up just because the situation is complex. But there is one area, and this is the circular economy, circularity. And very much when we talk about the garment industry, circular fashion, and understanding how a business model can be changed from buying a shirt every week or once a month to perhaps purchasing from circular businesses. And we see this happening already. We see in the last perhaps 5 years, a change in the attitude of the buyers, the consumer. And in countries such as Australia, but also here in Thailand, there are certain small business, small boutiques that they produce the orders that they receive from recyclable materials. And they focus on the design and the fabric and the sustainability of the fabric. And that business model goes, passed from consumer to consumer. And we see an increase of this circular fashion being successful. It's also nice fabrics, but also is the knowledge that they come from business that are fair for the workers, that have this decent work behind them. So if you ask me for a key knowledge gap, and a knowledge gap that can accelerate climate action, I would say the business models of the circular economy.
Thank you, Christina, for this. And we see some trends already around the world that this is hopefully gaining some momentum. I would like to ask the same question to Masaki Wada as well on in his view, the key knowledge gaps.
Actually, we support Japanese company, not only our member, but also others. On supply chain sustainability and human rights due diligence, social auditing, we have observed little interest and knowledge on the importance of complying with international human rights requirements, such as a UN guiding principle and Modern Slavery Act. So some company visit us for help when NGOs or investors require detailed explanations on ESG or suspected acts of human rights violation in apparent suppliers. Many multinational companies have issued statements for Modern Slavery Act and the Human Rights Due Diligence Report. However, they still need to be more specific about their materiality and actually execution for improvements. For Japanese company, there is a language disadvantage, I know. Understanding the global trend and learning good practice is challenging. So that is a key for Japanese company, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Masaki-san. So learning and sharing good practices, and your organization is certainly helping with that. That's very good. That brings us to the third question that we have for this evening here in Japan. And it actually was sort of asked previously in the question and answer section of the Zoom. Then it disappeared, but it could also just be me that can't find it. But basically, the third question is one that doesn't really have a simple answer. Well, none of these questions have, but it's something about the fact that some developing countries are now declaring their ambition to make supply chains environmentally and socially sustainable and just. We see that in the EU with the Green Economy Action Plan and the climate law and other things that seem to be changing in terms of the EU's ambition to green the supply chains. And we're not only talking timber and metals here, we're talking about plans for ICT and electronics, for steel, for cement and other heavy industry things. But that's just one part of this intention is probably good, right? We're going in the right direction, is my opinion, but it's just one side of the equation. What about the other side where the products are produced? What about in developing countries? How do we change this? We have sort of already getting into this, but how do we change this system? And what would be your advice to importing countries such as my own country, Denmark, or maybe Japan, or other countries that import? What do you think in the producing countries they require from those that import, if that makes sense? So I'd like to ask that question first to Julius, please.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Well, I think it's incumbent upon especially the multinational enterprises in developed countries to assist or to train their supply chains, the small and medium enterprises in developing countries. Try to train them, provide technical assistance to help them comply to basic labor, social standards, and environmental standards. And I think this is also where a lot of guidelines of OECD comes in. I think it's important that when it comes to development cooperation, a lot of projects, a lot of assistance should go towards building capacity for SMEs, MSMEs in developing countries to comply with standards. Second, I think it's very important that in developing countries, we have an enabling environment for freedom of association. I mean, with strong unions, with strong workers' organizations, you have a natural protection you can provide for workers. And they'll be the first one to look out for the benefit of workers. And they'll be the first one to also look at the how business processes are friendly to the environment or not. And then finally, related to that previous point, I think it's important for social dialogue to continue. It's important that governments, employers, groups, and workers continue talking to each other so that we can make the supply chain accountable. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you, Julius. I thought that's a very good answer. The same question just goes to Endo-san, please.
Thank you. As you said, I also understand that now that the manufacturers in developing countries are linked in global supply chains, either directly or indirectly. So the shift in procurement policy by multinational companies requires changes in the mindset and activity, even for companies in developing countries. So in this kind of transitional period, I think what is important is to have concrete best practices at on a sectoral basis. I mean, the situation of supply chain is very much different. Say auto industry, chemicals, garment. The supply chain is very different. For example, in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions, it's quite different. Different emission structures, and also, for example, how to promote renewable energy has much variety of applications depending on which sectors those companies in developed countries are involved. So at this moment, I think. Of course, we have sort of concept or general ideas to tackle this situation, but what we definitely need as the next step is to have more sectoral, concrete, practical tools and approaches to support developing companies, SMEs in developing countries. And in my understanding, in doing so, collaboration is a key for the relevant stakeholders. For example, there are many specialized organizations like this panelists. So each government agencies of the developed countries, together with industrial organization and specialized organization, and also with international organizations like the APO, can collaborate to solve this issue from now. Thank you.
Thank you, Endo-san. And I would like to turn the question over to Christina as well.
Thank you, Simon. I think the previous panelists reply very well to the question, but I would like to comment in addition that labor standards with the environmental standards they are key issues that needs to be through the value chain, through the supply chain. Of course, you pose the question in a very interesting way, because you mentioned how the environmental standards through the current situation in Europe is very much in the mind of the European countries, and under the leadership of the UK towards COP26 this year, I think we are in a huge momentum to perhaps accelerate reaching the Paris Agreement. But Asia is not just one country. Asia is many Asians in that way, in the way that countries don't have the same labor standards that the European countries have achieved. And they don't have the same environmental standards that have achieved already in Europe. And understanding how change needs to be in Cambodia or Bangladesh or Indonesia or India or Vietnam or Thailand requires a different level of understanding of labor standards and how the environmental standards can coexist, the co-benefits of environment and social. And this needs to be not just at the level of the brands, for example, in the garment industry, to follow the same example, but it needs to be at the level of what my colleague said, the small enterprises, the micro enterprises. They don't have the financial means for the innovations and the best practices. They might not even be aware of these innovations and best practices that they can use. So reaching out to the end of the supply chain, and the end might be the kitchen of a woman in one of the countries mixing chemical products for dyeing of garments for the big companies. So that is the reality that we need to focus. We need to focus on a model of development that is an Asian model of development where we reach out to the end of that supply chain and we look at the labor standards there and the environment.
Thank you, Christina. These are interesting ideas or answers. I mean, there's no one answer to this. It makes me think of, yes, the end of the supply chain, but also the other end. I mean, I personally think the role of government is really important and cannot be underestimated in terms of having the right regulations in place. Voluntarism can take us a far way, but not the whole way, I believe. But so the other end is also for us as end consumers that we know that we can know and can select products that are indeed, let's say, produced in a better way or in a more environmentally sustainable, more resilient way. So I think it really needs a massaging from multiple angles. Masaki Wada, the question goes over to you now.
Okay, from my experience, that I think some developed country with highly sensitivity would introduce similar legal requirements or even international guidelines. However, these countries tend to lack of enforcement, which means that companies have little incentive to follow the rule. In such a situation, it is easy to company to make a fake record, actually, which happen frequently. So it works better when maybe big brands, company of development countries require their supplier in developed country to comply with the rule. The big brands can push their supplier as their prerequisite for a contract. For example, Apple has pushed many of its suppliers in developed countries to improve on human rights, occupational health, and safety. However, in reality, it is difficult to push SMEs, small and medium enterprise. Developing countries need to improve their system, but it is equally important to developed country to understand what are the root causes that hinder a supplier in developed country from meeting the requirements, and need to think together how to achieve the requirements together. This is very important to think both of countries. I would also like to add that developed countries have human rights issues in their own country, especially regarding migrant workers. So think about together. And also I think that dialogue is very important, but in terms of, I think transparency is very important for both parties. That is my suggestions also. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very rich answer. We have actually, we have come to the end of our official part of the program. well, it wasn't supposed to be all that official, but more interesting and informative. So if there are any other questions by participants, you're very welcome to come in and ask questions. There's one here actually that could go to either Christina or Julius or somebody else, is the one about how can downstream companies address rights to unionize within their supply chain. You know, some upstream companies, including SMEs, may feel hesitant to promote unionization. What's your experience on how this can work?
Julius,
Yeah.
This is for you, I think.
Yeah, maybe I can start. Well, as Simon mentioned a while ago, the Philippines is one of the countries where up to 96% of enterprises are small, medium enterprises. And with this environment, we have had success in organizing into union, especially medium and some small enterprises. So I think the point is unionization, or the freedom to associate, the freedom to unionize, is part of the fundamental principles and rights at work for a reason. No, it means it doesn't matter if the enterprise is large or small, or if it's a multinational enterprise. The right of the workers to organize has always been embedded in the dignity at work. So I think the more that enterprises understand this, the more that states and governments understand this, the better for workers, and the better for having a, for lack of a better term, a cleaner supply chain for all of us.
Great, thank you, Julius. Christina, did you want to say anything on this?
Well, the only thing I can add is that the right to unionize is one of the 4 principles of the decent work agenda of the International Labour Organization, and the UN countries signed to this agenda, and the implementation needs to continue. And a very important labor of the trade unions in this regard, because the right to representation is not just that is part of the fundamental rights at work, it's also that is a innovation booster for the firms. So it's a way to promote social dialogue, to promote climate action, and certainly to integrate the creativity and innovation of workers in day-to-day operations. So for whatever angle that we see this issue, we see it in a positive way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina, for adding to this. We do have one question. It's a very difficult one. It's about how to make the infrastructure of education and majors in universities more in line with the required transition. It's a super difficult question. I mean, it's a very good question. Let me not say it's just difficult. I wouldn't know how to really answer it. I can tell you a little bit of my own experience that I have in university taken some interesting courses on systems thinking. So they do exist in some majors, and if you, unfortunately, they are not the dominant ones, which is maybe why we're having all the trouble that we are having. But they do exist, and if anybody else wants to come in on some of this, please, here's your chance.
I can say something here, because yes, it's a very good question from the floor, from one of the participants. I think it was maybe 15 years ago, or 20, maybe 15, when we started to talk much more seriously about the green economy and transitioning to the green economy. And at that point, there was like 2 pathways for green education, which is a very important point, green education through universities, but also through Tibet organizations, right? Because it's about green skills and how we provide these green skills to firms, but also to young people, to women, to workers. And one stream said, oh, we need to create specific courses, a specific curriculum, and then people can choose to go to that particular subject or that particular degree. And there was another strand, and I think it was from your government. I think it was Denmark, because at that point I was working in Europe. And it was Denmark that said, no. The way to do it is to embed green in every single subject that we do, in every single curriculum, module, training program, university course. Then I moved away from, I was at the OECD at that point, but I moved away and I don't know where the situation ended up. But these two can go together, and it's not one better than the other. Perhaps the one about embeddedness in everything that we do will accelerate climate action. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, thank you, Christina. That's over to the participants. What do you think? I think I just want to remind this is supposed to be an HLPF side event. For what it's worth. I mean, I think we have had a very rich discussion this evening, morning, or afternoon. I mean, in a way, how does it relate to the SDGs? It does in many ways, right? The SDGs are just sort of a goalpost where we should be going by 2030, or perhaps we need to extend to 2040 when we get to 2030. But so we will not meet the SDGs or the Paris Agreement without a just transition and without taking care of the environmental and the social aspects. And that's what we are trying to tackle. And it's difficult to tackle. I can see that some of us come from more the social angle, which is very important, and others of us maybe from IGES come traditionally more from the environmental angle. And I believe we have to get better at exchanging our views and provoking each other and finding ways forward to make progress on this. Finally, I think with this, I would see if there's any other comments or questions. And if not, then simply allow me to thank you very much for participating, and thank you for joining from near and from far. And thank you very much, and good night from Tokyo.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us, IGES.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Simon. I'm not used to calling you Dr. Simon, but
yeah, please, no need for that.
Gozaimasu.
Yeah, Eric, thank you.
Thank you so much,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye, everybody. Have a nice night.
Thank you very much.